Yeah, let me put this in here. Why is the idea still fresh in my mind? I thought about something, and it's something that actually, I know that I mentioned many a time I used to go through anxiety attacks and be afraid of, and I used to have this nervousness. I mean, fear, just actually, nervousness is not the right word. It was sheer terror of going out of the house. I mean, I've suffered from really, really bad panic attacks. And I overcame that problem on my own without having to go to therapy, without this, and I did it. But I used various techniques. I actually had to invent little techniques for doing that. But it's not about that. But from that, I thought about something. Something I know from using my little techniques about things. And this kind of gets into a little bit of a controversial issue. I'm going to say it because it will be controversial. Let's face it. I thought about this ideal, forget I even mentioned about the anxiety attacks for a moment. And think about something, which I'm thinking about. And it's what I call the tyranny of tomorrow. If you didn't know that there was such a thing as tomorrow, or even next, not even tomorrow, just the next 10 seconds, or even 1 second. If you didn't know there was such a thing as next, and you could only live in the present, you could only live in right now, you wouldn't have anxiety or fear. You couldn't. Fear requires a perception of time, a perception of next. I mean, even if you were being eaten by a shark right now, you wouldn't be afraid, even if you were going through pain. You wouldn't be afraid. You'd be going through pain, but you wouldn't be afraid. Because fear requires the perception of time. Anxiety requires the perception of time. You fear what's going to happen next. You don't fear what is happening now. You never fear what is going on now. You always fear what's going to happen next. And that's something I actually learned through my little techniques of overcoming anxiety attacks. It's not that I got rid of the whole concept or ideal of next or tomorrow, but I just learned to rethink next and tomorrow. I was thinking about something when I was looking at this book, which I haven't finished reading. It's called Stumbled Onto Happiness. And I just only at the beginning of it. And I was just thinking about what this guy was saying, what Daniel Gilbert was saying about, mentioning the thing about when some people who actually can't think about tomorrow. They can't think about next. And it's because of brain injuries, because of injuries to the frontal lobe. And they actually are stuck in a perpetual present. The perpetual present moment. People like that might not have a lot of fear and anxieties and stuff. But they can't plan for the future either. They can't think about the future. They can't, when it comes to doing anything dealing with the future, they just can't do it. They can deal with the present. They can do things. They can even function in many ways. But dealing with the next moment is impossible. You get the advantage of not having fears and anxieties, but you also lose the advantage of being able to plan things. If you didn't have the future, that would be a big problem. That would be a big problem. Even with all the fears and all the anxieties and all the uncertainties and the shakiness of it. I kind of treasure the future. I treasure the future as if it were a thing. The future isn't a thing. It's an experience that happens because of the way our brains process things. It's just something to think about. I thought about that. But, one day when I actually write my book, which I am writing, I will talk about some of the techniques. I can't talk that much about it on YouTube because I think it's a little bit too controversial. So I have to put it in a book form that I can run off and hide in a mountain because I'm a coward. I even admit it. I have to run off in a mountain somewhere because nobody's going to, although I might be surprised, people might actually receive my stuff well. But there are techniques that help me to overcome anxiety and help me to overcome fear. And I've even been attacked a little bit because of some of the things that, if you look at some of my past videos, you might get a better clue of that. But It's just an interesting thing, the tyranny of tomorrow, because tomorrow is something we fear. We fear making mistakes, for example. If we do something wrong right now, is what the consequences are going to have tomorrow. If we say something, what's going to happen tomorrow? You know, sometimes there are people who have tremendous fear about things. I remember one day, a few years ago, getting on the train. And there was this one guy, every time I get on a train at a certain time, there's always the same conductor. I guess they must have got rid of him because he's not there anymore. But he was like overly cautious in driving that train. He would get out of the train, check it, make sure everything was perfect, make sure everything, and he would be so nervous. And it's like it was very difficult for him to move from one station to the other. And we'd all wind up being late. And he disrupted the whole entire system because of his over carefulness, because he didn't want to make a mistake. Some people can become so terrified. And I know what he felt, because that's like what I was going through with the anxiety attacks. You become so afraid. You start wondering, you know, is something going to happen to me? Is this going to happen? You start speculating about the future. See, if you didn't have the idea of time, you wouldn't do that. But at the same time, it'd be hard to kind of plan what you're going to do next. You know, there is dealing with the future. Being able to function means being able to not just deal with what's going on right now, but dealing with possibilities, dealing with the future. And you have to learn techniques for dealing with time. Not only the future, but also dealing with the past. Being a competent person means dealing with time. Dealing with the past, yes, all the things that happened in the past, like learning to let go of the past, learning to forgive people and stuff like that, but dealing with the future. To take risk. I think the biggest thing I ever had to learn was to realize, one, you can never be absolutely certain about what's going to happen in the future, no matter how well you plan it. You can never be certain of the outcome of anything. Nothing is certain. You know, as they say, nothing is certain but death and taxes, and even that, who knows? But I'm not going to even get into that. But the thing is dealing with the future. And that's why I say the tyranny of the future. The future that can come and hurt you in some way. And you have to realize the future can't hurt you. There are techniques you have to learn. And like I said, you have to wait for my book to come out. And I've been working on that for umpteen years, for many more years than I can't even talk about. But when I bring up the book thing anymore, because I don't want people asking me too many questions about that. But it's just something I thought about. I just thought, that thought just popped in my head. I thought about the tyranny of the future. That's it.